Just a quick squat.
Oh, yeah. All right.
I tell you what, a person who believes that this wasn't set up by our own government is an idiot.
Okay, well, it looks like we are back in business here, and we're going to move on. We're kind of getting away from specifically only talking about verbs here a little more with our next concept, but it still falls under the category of verbs, and I guess you can pretty much guess that by the title, and that is shift in verb tense. Now, it can be complicated because here, we're starting to get into rhetoric. But in general, it is not okay to shift verb tense. But of course, when we're talking about meaning, then anything is okay. So you have to really now bring in rhetoric because a full understanding of this concept is going to require a bit of rhetoric. So we're definitely getting away from syntax. Definitely getting away from syntax because there are instances when you can shift tense, but of course you have to have a reason. And this is why I say that this is where we get into meaning or rhetoric here. So let us go ahead and get started and see if we can't, make sense of this whole issue of shift in verb tense. Of course, it is definitely more than just action going on, and I think you pretty much figured that out. Now, here's some of the things that you need to already know. Definitely, you need to know verb tense, and I think that we accomplished that through what we've covered so far. And you need to know subject-verb agreement, of course, and we've already discussed that, and you memorized all those rules that you needed to memorize. And you need to know pronoun agreement. We've already touched upon that. And clauses, we definitely went over that. There should be no confusion when it comes to clauses at all. And of course, logic and author meaning. And of course, we've dealt with that during our literature discussions. So I think that we have everything, or all the tools we need in order to proceed to verb tense. Now, if you are confused, or if you were confused about any of those items in that list, you need to go back and do a review before you begin shifting verb tense, because you're going to need that. You're definitely going to need that knowledge in order to successfully understand shift in verb tense. Now, let's talk about let's get started talking about logical and proper shift in verb tense. Basically, that's when the action should be done based on what's being said in the sentence. And this, I can't express enough that we're going to have to move into rhetoric here. We're definitely going to have to move into rhetoric. There, of course, are some cut and dry, written in stone pretty much, rules when it comes to shifting verb tense. But as we move on to more complicated concepts in shifting verb tense, you're going to see that meaning plays a tremendous role in when or when not to shift the tense of verbs. And also understand that everything that we're talking about obviously is dealing with multi-clause sentences, meaning that the only way you're going to have a shift in verb tense is if you have more than one verb tense. And the only way you're going to have more than one verb tense is that you have more than one subject-verb relationship. And the only way you can have more than one subject-verb relationship is you can have more than one clause in a sentence. So we're talking about multi-clause sentences, and we really just focused. I think we put our most focus on two-clause sentences, and then we tried to extend that into more cumulative sentences with 3 and 4 and 5 clauses. But It's a lot easier to deal with shifting verb tense when there are only two clauses. But of course, as we discovered when we went over complex compound sentences, well, it's not always that way. Sometimes there are 3 or more clauses, 4, 5, 6, 7 clauses in a sentence. And when you get to these multi-clause sentences, anything above 2, then the shifting verb tense becomes a little more difficult to identify if you're a test taker, and a lot more difficult to actually do when you're a writer, or avoid making a mistake in that area when you're a writer. So, but getting the basics is definitely what we have to do. So let's talk about this now. When you describe events that occur at the same time, of course you're going to use the same tense. I mean, you're describing something that happened at the same time. Why would you use different tenses? For instance, Jerry shouted and threw his arms in the air as if he won the tennis match. Now we see the verbs here. Jerry shouted and threw. Shouted and threw, of course, is a compound verb there, but the subject for that verb is Jerry, his arms in the air as he won. And here we go with our second subject-verb relationship, won being the verb here, and of course it is past tense. So shouted, threw, and won, all past tense. And based on the meaning, you wanted that thing to have happened in the past at the same time, so therefore you used all the same. Let's look at it this way. Say if we go ahead and made it present tense, because that's what you wanted to say. Jerry shouts, it's like you're describing it as it happens. Jerry shouts and throws his arms in the air as he wins the tennis match. Sounds like a commentator. This is, I guess, the way a commentator would say it. But the point being is that the commentator would say or use all the verbs in their present tense form in order to indicate that this is something happening right now as I'm speaking, or as he is speaking, the commentator. So we need to understand that if the commentator switched it up, it wouldn't make sense. Jerry shouted and threw his arms in the air as he wins the tennis match. Wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, the person listening to the commentator would be really confused and not understand what he's saying. This is why it's important to make sure those verb tenses are in their correct form. Okay, so let's check this out. When describing events that occur at different times, I'm sorry, I got it. I'm sorry, I'm bad teacher. I got to sip me some tea. Sorry. Okay, back to us. When describing events that occur at different times, use verbs in different tenses to show sequence of events. Well, I mean, obviously, if you're trying to show that this happened and after that happened and after that happened, you want to make sure, if you're talking about chronological events, you want to make sure you get the verbs right, or it's not going to make sense. For instance, Barbara mentioned that she had made an appointment for tomorrow. Now, of course, we have two clauses here. The main clause, Barbara mentioned being the verb, Barbara being subject, and she, of course, being that she had, being the dependent clause, she being the subject, had being the verb. If you notice, mentioned and had, of course, or had made, is past tense. But they're not the same past tense. But we needed to make them this way. We needed to use, for instance, we need to use the past perfect and the past in order to demonstrate chronology here. Okay, and in order to get our meaning here, Barbara mentioned that, and as if you're talking about Barbara mentioned something, but what she mentioned that she didn't take place at that moment. It took place sometime in the past before she mentioned it. Now, of course, in order to understand that, we need to go back to when we discussed the verb tenses, because this is where the key of that item in the list that I showed you at the beginning, understanding verb tense, comes in, because you got to know the meaning of the different tenses in order to really get this. Now, because if we changed the tense, then the meaning would slightly change. It's not saying that you couldn't change the tense here. Like, for instance, Barbara mentions that she had made a pen. You still could say it that way. You know, you still could say it that way. But you couldn't say Barbara mentioned that she makes an appointment. I mean, it wouldn't make sense to make it present tense in the second clause. That would totally, make the meaning illogical. So there are certain combinations of verb tenses that you can use. This is why I say it's not like a general rule that you have to use all the same verb tenses. The thing is that now we move into rhetoric, and the verb tenses that you use have to make sense. They have to match with the meaning of what you're trying to say. Lori is knitting a scarf for her brother and will give it to him for his birthday. So let's break this sentence down here. Lori is, and of course is knitting is the full verb. Lori is the subject. And will give it to him, next clause, will give it to him for his birthday. Okay? Now, this is not necessarily another clause. This could be considered like a compound predicate here. But the point being is that we have two verbs here, will give and is knitting. Well, we know will definitely deals with the future, is definitely deals with the present, but they go together because of the meaning of the sentence. She did something in order to do something else in the future. So that makes sense. What we probably couldn't say, Lori is knitting a scarf for her brother that she gave him on his birthday. I mean, we couldn't change it like that, because we definitely would have to change the meaning, and now the meaning would be illogical. I mean, how could you be knitting a scarf she gave, unless she was fixing it, but maybe it got a hole in it. But we don't know that because we don't have enough information to go on. So definitely for test takers, when you're dealing with sentences alone, individually, and you don't have more information to go on, there's certain assumptions you cannot make. You can't make, like you couldn't make the assumption that she's fixing the sweater. And that's why, the second part is past tense as opposed to future. You couldn't do that because you would have nothing else to go on. So that's kind of the danger of, making assumptions when you don't have anything else to go on. But, technically you could change the tenses in that way, provided you had more to go on. But that sentence by itself, changing that second clause to past, wouldn't be logical in the sentence alone, as we can say alone by itself. Okay, let us continue here. Okay, now let's deal with some rules here. Use present perfect tense to indicate current regular action. We know that. Present perfect tense, of course, is the has or have plus the past participle. Yes. And Jeffrey, for instance, Jeffrey goes to the gym 6 days a week, where he has gained not only muscle but also discipline. Excellent verb tenses there. Goes, has, gained, makes good sense. Had would also make good sense there, as well as some other things. But in order to, deal with the meaning here, this is a more perfect way to talk about Jerry and his 6 days of the week. Okay, next rule here, we're going to use past perfect to indicate past action that occurred before another past action. Okay, past tense. Regular equals, of course, we know the ed, irregular verb forms, of course, they change in their spelling. And of course, we know the past perfect tense is the had plus the past participle. And for instance, Jeffrey had lifted free weights for over an hour before someone mentioned the rip in his shorts. Of course, here we definitely need to be careful with the meaning, because it would, it could easily be misunderstood here. But the point being is that we're trying to show an example of what we mean by using a past perfect tense in a sentence and how it helps with meaning, although it doesn't perfectly match the tense of the other clause. Okay, let's continue here. Use progressive tense to indicate an ongoing action that occurs as another action happens. Progressive form, of course, is the form of be and the verb plus the ing. For instance, Jeffrey was showing off when he tore a muscle in his shoulder. Okay, was showing being the verb. Jeffrey was showing off when he tears a muscle in his shoulder. It wouldn't make sense there. Of course, definitely doesn't match the meaning, and it's just illogical altogether. There's no way you could do that. But the point being that you want to use these progressive tenses with other tenses solely for meaning, and you have to make sure that you use them in conjunction properly with other verbs. Now let's look at this. Could and would, past tense, can and will. We got to remember that. That's a definite rule that we have to remember. Could, would equals past tense of can and will. All right. This is definitely one that a lot of students get confused here. But if you can remember that, the past tense of could and would is can and will. The past tense of can and will is could and would, then you wouldn't have a problem there. Jeffrey thought he will have enough energy for his workout, but skipping breakfast meant that he cannot complete his training. Does that make sense? Read it again. Jeffrey thought. Of course, thought is past tense, so why would we use will after having you did that? No, and cannot is not going to go with that because we're dealing with past tense here, so we need past tense verbs. So although we may even speak like that, but it's not correct. It definitely would be would. Jeffrey thought he would. Past, have energy for his workout, but skipping breakfast meant that he could not complete his training. So remember the could and would and the can and will. Okay, so proper shift in verb tense should be logical to the reader. Now let's get down to business now that we did a little bit of review of our verb tenses. Are the verb tenses that are really affected by shift in verb tense. Are the verb tenses we most commonly use when shifting in verb tense. Now let's get down to business here. Proper shift in verb tense should be logical. Okay, it should be logical. Now we're dealing with logic here. Definitely we're in rhetoric, full throttle here now. Juan played his guitar, which is 20 years old. Now, of course, we're talking about the guitar that is 20 years old, so there's no ambiguous, there's no misplaced modifier here. The guitar is 20 years old, and of course we know a guitar can be 20 years old. Okay, so Juan played his guitar, which is 20 years old. Now, definitely one second. Okay, yeah. Definitely here, played and is okay. Because the guitar right now is 20 years old. And even though Juan played it in the past, that's okay. Maybe in the past, when he was playing it, it was 20 years old. Yes. Okay, that's okay. Juan loves his guitar, which was stolen yesterday. Now, this definitely makes sense here, because just because the guitar was stolen doesn't mean that Juan doesn't love it anymore. He loves his guitar right now because he's thinking about it. It was stolen yesterday. So Juan is loving it in the present here. And although it was stolen in the past, he still loves it. I mean, of course, it would be nice if we stopped loving something when it was stolen. It might make it a little easier for us to get over it. But I mean, that's just not reality. So this verb tense is doing really good right here. Let us continue. Okay, let's look at this sentence. Proper shifting verb tense should be logical, of course, as we said a minute ago. As soon as he wakes, Juan played his guitar. As soon as he wakes, Juan played his guitar. Now we got a present tense and a past tense here. That's okay. As soon as he wakes, Juan played his guitar. Played. Yes. You weren't listening to me. I said plays. I confused you. I said plays. Again, that's not. You're right. If you had said that. As soon as he wakes, Juan played his guitar. Yes. Juan loved his guitar, which is stolen yesterday. Juan loved his guitar, which is stolen yesterday. Excellent shift in verb tense. And I know you're listening to me saying, no way. And you're absolutely right. There's no way that's going to work. How? Juan loved his guitar, which is stolen yesterday. Okay, so automatically you should have heard a problem with that one. Juan loved his guitar, which is stolen yesterday. There's no present tense. I mean, here with is stolen yesterday? No, it doesn't make sense. It is definitely not logical. Yes. Okay, all right. So, use the past tense to describe events that were completed in the past, or to make statements or generalizations that are tied to the past. To make statements or generalizations that are tied to the past, meaning they have some connection to the past. The statement, what is being said, has some connection to the past. So we're talking about a multi-clause sentence, okay? And we're talking about events. And some of the events that are being mentioned have some relationship to the past. Okay, so that's what that means. For instance, Juan played the guitar for his wife last night. Okay, now this, of course, we know Juan played the guitar for his wife last night. So the reason we're putting played here is because this has some connection to what happened in the past. Because Juan did not practice, he played poorly. So now we got something to go on. We have something to go on. That sentence above it gives us something to go on as far as what the next, or how the next sentence should, definitely the tenses should play out. Should be. Okay? How should the tenses be in the next sentence? Now we get an understanding. It probably would have been a little difficult for us to understand if we only had the because sentence and we didn't have the sentence above it. But now that we have our because sentence, we have a better idea of what, now that we have our Juan sentence here, we have a better understanding of how the because sentence should go. So let's read it together. Because Juan did not practice, he played poorly. Okay? Now, we know the situation. Now we can understand that the tenses in that sentence are going to work. Yes, they're going to work. Juan failed to impress his wife. Okay, so now we understand why we have the verb did, and the verb played. We understand that now. So it definitely makes sense. Juan decided to practice. Okay, so we definitely want to make sure that when we are dealing with verb tenses, and we're talking about chronological order, as we can see in these sentences here, and in this multi-clause sentence here with even two verb tenses. Now we see how they are connected. the chronology, this happened first, then that happened, then that happened. And even if you're talking about it in the past, you definitely have to make sure you use those verbs that show connection to the past. And that was beautifully illustrated here, and here, and here, and here. And it's like, I don't know, it's like fine food. Anyway, so let's continue here. Now, use present tense, of course, to make statements of fact, or to make generalizations that are true now and will continue to be true unless something happens to change the situation. So it's true now, and it will continue to be true until something makes it not true. Okay, so let's look at an example of what we're saying. Juan plays the guitar for his wife every night. Okay, all right. Because Juan does not practice, he plays poorly. Okay, so there's nothing indicating that that the tense should change here at all. Juan always fails to impress his wife. Okay, all right. Whenever he fails, Juan always decides to practice. So here we have chronological events just like the previous, but this time we're dealing with present tense. And we see how all of the present tense verbs fit here beautifully. If we notice plays, of course, where it should be, because Juan does and plays is good, because we're talking about chronological events here, and Juan always fails, yes, and whenever he failed, no, we don't have to say that. Juan always decides, or Juan always decided, no. It's okay the way it is because we're showing an order here, and there's nothing that has happened that is going to cause us to have to change the tense. So we definitely can use the tenses in that way. But of course, here again, we have something to go on because we have something to look at above the sentence, above the multi-clause sentence especially. So we know, we have an idea of how things should play out within the sentence. Okay. This is going to be our last one for this part of shift and verb tense, and we're going to continue after that. Is there a reason to shift? That's the question. Shift tense, when you need to describe both a complete action and a habitual, usual action or state of being. These are the three reasons why you should shift tense. To describe a completed action or habitual action, or to show a state of being. These are the three reasons why you can shift tense. Okay, let's look at this. Juan played the guitar in Islamic school.
We'll talk about tomorrow. Yeah, that's rolling the hard way. We don't want to roll quite that hard. We want to get one of them little minibuses.
What's up? Tell you what, a person who believes that this wasn't set up by our own government is an idiot.
Everybody's gone out of their mind.
Welcome to Mr. Quick's class.
Welcome to Mr. Quick's class. Welcome to Mr. Quick's class. Welcome, Mr. Quick's class.
Oh, yeah. All right.